everybody. How we doing today? Today we're going to try an interesting concept. We're going to connect the dots between the early golden age of hip-hop and jazz. And there's a lot of linkages. There's kind of a direct link through the generations, through swing into hard bop, into early soul, R&B, the funk, and then into hip-hop. It's all kind of just a generational progression of the black experience in America. But when hip-hop first comes on the scene in the late 70s in New York and the Bronx and Brooklyn, it's just kind of a party thing. A guy who had a bunch of records would set up a couple turntables, and he would find breaks in the music. That'd be a 4-bar measure, and you would just try to play that one and go to this one and play that one and match the tempos, and it would create this new track out of those 4 bars that essentially was a manual sampling of the song. You needed to have, of course, 2 copies of the record to do it. And there was a lot of street parties and outdoor parties and house parties that were kind of building around this new phenomenon. And as these DJs started doing that, creating these new tracks in a sense, it left room for people to throw bars on top of, and they started rhyming, and it was a kind of a competitive thing, like the jazz cats would try cutting each other in a cutting battle between 2 or 3 saxophone players. Different guys at the party would try to get up and tell their story and kick a bunch of rhymes to the beats, and it was improvisational at the highest level. And it demands a lot of wit, some knowledge, creativity, usually some comedy, some bravado. It was very much just a kind of a loose, and you're going to come up with things that you go back to on a regular basis, but you also have to be able to read your opponent and throw dirt on them and make yourself look better. And it was a fun, new type of cutting contest. And a lot of what was being sourced to do these battles was, of course, early soul R&B music, but jazz music was also very much utilized, and not so much the swing era, not even as much the hard bop era, but the soul jazz era into the fusion R&B funk jazz era, that crossover, that stuff was extensively borrowed from. And there's a lot of great instrumental breaks on jazz records because there's not going to be vocals on a lot of them to begin with. You know, you weren't going to take a 4-bar break that had a bunch of vocals in it. You wanted that instrumental 4 bars so you could put your vocals into it. And of course, later down the road, a guy like Kanye West will come along and he'll take a vocal and he'll speed it way up and speed the sample way up, so it's not even recognizable anymore. You can't even tell what it is. But the links between hip-hop and jazz are fairly tangible, and it goes directly through the soul and the funk decades of the 60s and the 70s. So anyway, this is a song here by Ronnie Foster. It's called Mystic Brew. And the great Tribe Called Quest obviously are the ones who kind of come along, and they use a lot of jazz samples in their native tongue collective with Diggable Planets and De La Soul. There's a lot of jazz stuff being borrowed by Prince Paul and some of the other cats that were producing that stuff. And interesting thing is that a great break would sometimes be sampled by multiple people. This Ronnie Foster song is also sampled by J. Cole only a few years back. This is probably 2015. And in a way, you're paying homage to the Tribe Called Quest and to the original artist. You know, it was there's a duality to it. You know, we're going to acknowledge both, and I don't want to get these the sample bots overhearing what we're doing too much here. So we're gonna kind of keep some of these hip hop records lower. But there's a lot of examples of the process of hip hop and jazz fusing. This, of course, is the great Herbie Hancock, and this is Cantaloupe, and this is, I believe it's got Wayne Shorter, Freddie Hubbard, no Shorter, just Hubbard, Hancock, Carter, and Williams. But Cantaloupe Island is probably the most straightforward song on this record, actually. But this song famously gets borrowed by the UK acid jazz group Us 3. And they also put a Art Blakey vocal sample in there from Night at the Birdland. And again, I don't want to play too much of that because I think the YouTube bots will pick it up. But so hip hop and jazz are very interwoven, and it's kind of fun going through the different permutations of this stuff. I, of course, don't come from a hip hop background. I was raised very much in the rock and roll sense of things, and then I got into soul, and then jazz, and then of course I had some hip hop. Back in my party days, I was listening to a lot of like Dre and Snoop and Pac and all that. But when I started DJing, it really kind of forced me to broaden and pick up a lot of hip hop, and a lot of it really grew on me. A lot of it has a kind of a short shelf life because it's very static, and it doesn't have a lot of arrangement or production. It doesn't have song structure, key changes, harmony. A lot of it's just a 4-bar loop that is going to go for 120 measures, and they might add a few things to it to make it the layers denser, but most hip-hop songs are only good 8, 10, 12 times, and there's nothing more to really glean in that sucker because you've heard that measure 124 times how many times you've heard the song, you know. The most interesting part was when they took the beat out for 8 bars. Like, it's got limited food in there. But this is a great song by Sly and the Family Stone. Thank you for letting me be myself. And I'm playing this because this was kind of one of my introductions into the joy of sampling and how worlds can collide. I was mid-90s, a big collector of Sly Stone and this era of R&B, soul music, funk music, and my best friend at the time, Justin, still my best friend, he was a big R&B modern guy. And when he heard that break right there, it floored him. And it was kind of an example of two worlds colliding. Because that Slide in the Stone break became the loop for Rhythm Nation, and he fell out. And my old school world collided with his more modern world, and we realized that how connected these different worlds were. And that's part of the wonder of this music, is it is very interwoven fabric. And that's part of the joy of it. We were then, just me and my same friend, were listening one day, smoking a herbal cigarette, as Paul McCartney once said. We were listening to this fantastic jazz samba record, a hot summer day, and this came on, and we were like, oh my god, that's the break in The Far Side in Runnin'. Nova groove. And we'd heard this song enough that when we heard this, we were like, oh my God, did you hear that? And it was just kind of fun seeing where this music was being sourced from. And it was very informative. You know, it was kind of exciting in a way. And it just kind of started opening up our eyes. This isn't really a jazz song per se. It's David McCollum, and he's kind of an interesting arranger, producer, writer. But this is obviously yada da 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 ba 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 ba. So that was just like, wow, you know, where did that come from? Where did that come from? And then we started kind of listening for breaks and samples when we were going through old records. It was kind of fun to, when we were DJing, to do source and sample, where we would play the original song, and then we would drop in the sample that everybody was going to know. This is a song that came on these Blue Note Trip records. It's called Lobby Cifre Agata. And it's got a nice little funk groove to it. You're like, okay, it's got a nice feel to it. But then, this sucker's about to drop down and do a break. Then we heard this. My name is... So once again, Dr. Dre is finding some interesting stuff to source that's got jazz lineage to it. And that's just pretty cool. And I think as a young guy that was doing a lot of exploring in music, this was super interesting to me. This was Massive Attack, the Blue Lines record that comes out in 1990, I believe. And that bass line right there was just so badass to me. I'm like, this is just great. These guys are great. Thought they were fantastic musicians even. And then years later, I'm listening to Billy Cobham. And I'm like, this is pretty out there. I don't know if I can do this. Like, it's not commercial, not accessible. We're like, what? What? that bass line, straight from a Billy Cobham record. And it just, you know, it floored us. We're like, wow. And it just, jazz and our hip hop are full of these crossovers. And it's mostly going to be 65 through 75, the year they got sampled. But in part that makes sense because not only is that the funky stuff, but it's also stuff that the average hip hop DJ, producer, it's gonna be the stuff that their daddy listened to when they were young guys. This, of course, is Donald Byrd's Flight Time from the Blackbird record. And Fear of a Black Planet borrows that weep, 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 weep. It's kind of impressive, the scope of some of these hip-hop producers' range. They're digging pretty deep on some of this stuff. There it is. And again, I don't want to have to block stuff out here, so. This is Jeremy Steig. If I recall, he makes a record with Bill Evans at one point on Verve, if I recall, real late. Beastie Boys. They borrow that riff. It's just fun kind of finding them, you know, and as a DJ it's fun kind of informing the room when you find a piece that's just interesting like that. Donald Byrd, of course, Lou Donaldson, both have been sampled endlessly. This is Stepping in Tomorrow, which is easily one of my favorite Donald Byrd funk records, produced by the Mizell brothers. That's again Tribe Called Quest, the track Footprints. The song was also sampled by Main Source. This is the Breaking Atoms record from '91, classic hip hop. The song was Looking at the Front Door, which was, you hardly hate to use the word hit, because in those days hip hop was just kind of finding its footing, but all the same, it's a classic part of hip hop history, and it's this era hip hop that's going to be fairly entrenched and dug into jazz sound. Boo-doo-boo. The Wu-Tang sample that. It's on the Jazzmatazz record. And that's Gangstar, Code of the Streets. So you can see the links are pretty omnipresent from this era of rap music, hip hop music. It was being very much taken from. This also samples Lonnie Smith's Spinning Wheel, which we'll talk about in a minute here. Another one of the ones that really kind of hit you early on. Tribe Called Quest, again borrow here from Grant Green. And so you can hear how jazz is pretty omnipresent in hip-hop music of the early classic golden era hip-hop. You know, there's no question that hip-hop's gone a long ways away at this point from its jazz roots. You know, it doesn't sample records the same way it used to. Recording digitally has gotten so much easier. There's really not a whole lot of sampling and collecting old records the way there was before. This, believe it or not, is Diggable Planets. They're one of the great hip-hop groups with the Native Tongue era, Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul. This song samples an Art Blakey record I actually don't have from 1979. It's all taken from that record, and it's Diggable Planets do a lot of hip-hop borrowing from jazz. You know, they Rebirth of the Cool. This is a compilation of their first two records. It doesn't have all their stuff on it, but Diggable Planets, if you go back and listen to them, are really some of the best. Oh, this one's so fucking hard to read. I'm getting blind in my old age, I'm afraid. You just talked about Miles there. This Dial 7. It's borrowing some of this from Eddie Harris. And of course they'll often match together three or four samples to make one hip-hop track, depending on the producer, the era, the sound they're looking for. Classic Eddie Harris stuff. Diggable Planets records are filled with great jazz samples. They really are. This is Wind Parade, another great Donald Byrd record. Places and Spaces. Big fan of this record. And Black Moon, a great New York group from early 90s. So you hear how Black Moon borrows this track. And then Tupac also borrows this song. And I think it's kind of funny how Pac used to kind of sound real gangster and edgy and dangerous. And nowadays you hear it. There it is. So again, hip hop's mostly taking from early R&B and soul records, but a lot of these jazz records were convenient because they weren't filled with words, so you could just find any 4 bars. This is Lou Donaldson's Hot Dog record. Here he's doing the It's Your Thing by the Isley Brothers, an instrumental version of that. And the average hip hop crew was like, oh, I love It's Your Thing. A version without words, an instrumental essentially.
One day when I was riding on the train, I seen these 2 chicks talking.
That's Brand Nubian. Brand Nubian's another great part of the native tongue, New York, late 80s, early 90s wave of hip hop. There's a lot of consciousness in it. It was very social movement. It was a very positive, uplifting movement. It wasn't at all the dark side. It was bright and fun, and it was meant to be uplifting. And shortly after that, Public Enemy comes along, NWA comes along, and that stuff's kind of equivalent to those Blue Note hard bop records. You know, this stuff's a little bit earlier, a little bit more fun, a little bit more soulful. Lou Donaldson again, Mr. Shingling, on this record he does his Ode to Joe, and Jesus Walks by Kanye West samples that, as well as A$AP Rocky, the song LSD. Good stuff. On this record, Kendrick Lamar samples a Grant Green track that I think is pretty fantastic. A record I've liked for a long time. I was a pretty big fan of Common. I thought Common was pretty dope. I liked this record a lot. The Resurrection record that came out before it. I'd like to cue it up, but I don't have headphones here. Fantastic stuff. It's a great Bobby Caldwell. He's a soul R&B singer. And that Common takes us for the song The Light. It's a wonderful, wonderful sample. And you can play either one of these songs and the bar will sing along to this song. Just beautiful stuff. Jazzmatazz was brought to us by Guru. Guru was a member of Gangstar, passed away a couple years back now, but he brought us the Jazzmatazz series, and it took it to a different level where he actually was bringing in guys like Donald Byrd, Adea Davenport, Roy Ayers, Ronnie Jordan, Lonnie Liston Smith, Courtney Pine, Ramsey Lewis, Chaka Khan, Donald Byrd again, Reuben Wilson, Freddie Hubbard. So he's bringing in the guys who were still alive here back in the mid-90s and doing these records. And unfortunately, I don't think they're that good. They don't really have enough jazz in them to make them jazz, and there's not enough arrangement and songwriting to give them hooks. There's a song on here, Living in This World, that's outstanding. Living in this world, yeah, it's just a great song. But most of the rest of the stuff on these records, it's okay, but it's not fantastic. And it's kind of, people are like, oh, Gangstar is so great, the good little Jazzmatazz. And I went into it with kind of high expectations, and it's one of those things where I kept going back to it over the years, and I was just never able to really go, oh, that's what this is about. And this is kind of a tough thing to do, to show you this stuff. It's hard to kind of match it all up and show you while I'm talking to you. I'm trying not to play too much so that we don't get the sample bots triggered.
Yes, my skin is black.
Last thing I want to show you right now
To hold me back.
is this is a great song by the Spinners. Came out on the VIP label, 1969. And it's not part of their big string of hits that they do in the 70s. No matter how hard they try, they can't stop me now. It's a bit of a civil rights movement song. And Nas comes along and borrows it here. They got the guitar line playing. They actually get one of the surviving Spinners to come in to sing along and do some things on the track. So Nas is connecting, again, that soul movement to the hip-hop kids of 2010 when this came out. I could have done soul hip-hop samples for hours, and there's a lot of cool jazz ones that I missed or didn't take the time to find. My hip-hop records are a bit of a mess back there. I played for 2 years of gigs. They're all kind of just scrambled up. They're sort of loosely by decade, but I found what I could find. Hip-hop and jazz are definitely linked. Diggable Planets, De La Soul, Tribe Called Quest, Brand Nubian, a lot of those, X-Clan, the groups from that era really found a lot of useful stuff. CTI got sampled a lot. So you're going to hear a lot of really cool jazz from the late 60s, early 70s in the golden age of hip-hop. The late 70s and in the mid 80s, it's kind of finding its way. A lot of it's just beat machines with voices and maybe a DJ doing some scratching, and it doesn't really evolve until post Run DMC, Aerosmith crossover. There's suddenly a little more recognition, a little bit more money is being thrown at hip-hop production, and there's this first golden wave that goes into the studios, and there's innovators in music, there's imitators in music, there's creators in music, and this first wave of innovator that went into the studio and made this first wave of hip-hop. It's really some powerful stuff, and it's connected to jazz also by its social message and its consciousness. Hip-hop wasn't a naive, ignorant music at that point. It was very full of power and life and had things to say, and that connects it to jazz. Jazz was a music of resistance, of survival, of overcoming, and hip-hop was that same thing. And I think the powers that be wanted to suppress hip-hop. They tried to warn people about it. They put labels and stickers on it. They tried to make it demonized as some evil devil music. And all it kind of did was make kids want to listen to it more behind their parents' back. It doesn't really work. You can't ban something. You're just going to give it more power, more credence. And they kind of eventually give up on that. There's FBI files on a lot of these really hip-hop guys. KRS-One, Chuck D, Rakim. Those guys were knowledgeable guys that had a lot of things to say that connected back to the Black Panthers and a lot of the social movements of the 60s and 70s. And Chuck D knew his stuff inside and out, you know, and it obviously became impossible to stop hip-hop, and so instead they just bought it out, and it became music to market products to young white kids. selling shoes, Timberlands, jackets, clothing, jerseys, the whole marketing of the image of the young white trash kid, Eminem. It's all kind of this crossover once rap started marketing clothing, and then eventually it gets into marketing cars and wristwatches and yachts and jet skis, and now it's the rap kids today are talking about diamonds and Ferraris. And I can't think of anything more damaging to a young black youth in the south side of Atlanta with very little prospects for financial gain in life to feel like the only way he's ever going to get a woman is to have a Ferrari and a bunch of diamonds. Like, you're just training him, begging him to be a criminal. And the system has built prisons just waiting to arrest him. And if I had just built a prison for profit and I needed to fill it, the greatest way to make criminals is to create this kind of art and image in this rap music of today that creates kids that go out and want to fill those prisons. And I think it's a self-fulfilling, self-feeding system that it's just slavery of a new ilk. And it's really sad to see how hip-hop got bought out and tainted and turned into a message brought to you by the man, because ain't no black artist, rapper, studio mogul own Ferrari. He doesn't own diamond mines. That stuff's not being brought to him by them. You know, they're lucky to own a shoe clothing line. They don't own these big wealthy clothing lines and diamond and cars and Lambos, and it's silly. It's really silly, and it's destructive. But it doesn't change the fact that the early days of hip hop were golden and had some great things to say. And it doesn't have the staying power of jazz to me because it's so much more stoic. 4 bars, 8 bars. You hear the words enough times, there's nothing left to really pick up. Unlike a jazz song where there's no 4 bars the same. Every four bars, everyone's doing something different constantly. And you hear something new every time you hear a jazz record. So my old man ears kind of need that life and bubbling brook of a jazz song moving along. That's what I enjoy. I hope you enjoyed this. It's a bit of a weird side episode, but I just wanted to break it up a little bit. Hope y'all are doing safe. Talk to you soon. Peace.